So, welcome to the final section, which is all about your health and performance. So, for this section, we're really going to be talking a lot about you and some healthy behaviors that you can adopt to be healthier, to be more well, and to be more productive and to perform and reach your potential. So the key learning outcomes are going to be revolving around stress and resilience. And as we see as we go through today, stress and resilience and our physical well-being are all really quite intertwined. And what we are really going to do again as well is learn some individual practical solutions that we can use to support our health and our well-being and our performance. All right, so let's talk a little bit about stress. So, do you guys think that poor levels of stress equate mental health? So, just in this chat function, do you think, just put a yes or no, or maybe, or whatever your answer is. Do you guys think that high levels of stress create poor mental health? And I'll just give you a minute to enter that in. So, I'm seeing some yeses. Absolutely. Okay. So yeah, so a lot, yeah. So for sure, there's a lot of a really good common understanding that high levels of stress can create poor mental health. But the important thing to remember here is that they can, but it is not actually necessarily, it's not a causational thing. There's a correlation, but high levels of stress do not necessarily cause it. So I'm going to share why, because there's really quite a bit of, sometimes a bit of misconception that high levels of stress equate poor mental health. And so they don't always equate it. Some people will have high levels of stress and it actually helps them perform better and it actually can contribute to support them. But as you guys all know, that high levels of stress, when we don't have the proper coping mechanisms and we don't have the proper support, it can impact our mental health and create a decline in our mental health and can contribute to all kinds of negative things that we're going to go into here in a little bit. But what I do want to point out though is that there is a continuum of stress, and there's the continuum of good stress and of bad stress. So the good stress is called eustress and the bad stress is called distress. And then there's something in the middle too that can help us to really perform well. So when we look at the continuum of mental health, this is a slide from a Mental Health Commission of Canada's mental health first aid training, and it's a really good slide because there's a correlation between obviously mental health and stress, but the impact, or what I want to point out to you, is that when we have poor mental, or we have high levels of stress, we might actually also we can actually have good mental health at the same time. Just like when a person has a mental disorder, they might have good coping mechanisms, and maybe they are taking medication that keeps things totally under control, or maybe not, but they have other supports and things in place that help to support them, and they can actually have very good mental health even though they have a mental health disorder. Now the same thing goes with stress. Some people can have a really high level of stress, but they can actually function well and have good mental health. And now what that level of stress is that will still allow us to have good mental health, it varies from person to person. And of course, there's always a limit. It's not like we can have never ending amounts and have good mental health. That's for sure not true, because as you all said, we can definitely reach a point, a level of stress that can really have a negative impact on our health. But the level that's for us varies from person to person. All right, so let's look at a couple of models of stress. So here's the Yerkes-Dodson model, and it shares a continuum of and charts out how stress and anxiety can compare to our performance. So there is an optimal level of stress, that can help contribute to us to perform well. But there's also too much stress can create exhaustion and lead us to burnout. And so it can be an issue trying to achieve and find this balance. But there are a lot of coping mechanisms, and there's a lot of tools, and there's a lot of support that we're going to learn today that you can use to help address issues that you may be going through. So again, if we have too little stress, we need some good stress. Too little stress is going to have us being really apathetic. We're going to be lethargic. We're going to have low motivation, and we're going to have low performance. So we still do need some stress for sure. No stress at all will be negative for us. And you know, when you think about athletes too, the athletes need a certain level of stress in their muscles in order to perform well. And in fact, the more stress they put on their muscles, provided they have recovery time, actually makes them stronger. Because weight training, for example, and even cardiovascular training results in, so in muscle training, our muscle fibers literally get micro tears. And when you're when you're weight training, you're actually breaking down the muscles and creating a whole bunch of tears so that they can come back and become stronger, and they recover stronger. So, and that creates what we can equate to in stress is resilience. Sometimes when we experience stress, and it allows us to bounce forward stronger than we were before. Not that the tough times were easy, but they trained us. Just like exercise can always be easy, but it can train us to be stronger. Same thing with our cardiovascular system. When we're taxing it and say we're doing sprints or we're running hard or doing things like that, it's actually breaking it down while we're exercising, but it repairs stronger to adapt to the stress that we were experiencing. And so I want to share with you a quote from a book called Resilience: Mastering Life's Greatest Challenges. And it says that most of us believe that stress is bad, but when stress can be managed, it can tend to be very good and necessary for health and growth. Without it, our body actually weakens because we need a bit of stress. We need some good stress. So if we can learn to harness it, it can actually serve as a catalyst for us to develop greater strength and even greater wisdom. So the intent of what I'm sharing with you today is to start to change our perception of stress. And our perception can be incredibly powerful. Our perception really, truly is our reality. So the more that we can perceive stress as something that's helping us to build us to be stronger and building us to become more resilient, the better off that we will be. And that all comes down to how we change our mindset and how we frame our thoughts. So again, this image of the diamond just goes to show you a diamond, the rough rock, in order to become a diamond, needs to undergo incredible pressure and strength, right, for it to be compounded into the beautiful rock that it can become. And so sometimes some stress is good for us, but we do need to have good coping mechanisms, and we do need to learn how to be able to reframe our thoughts and change our perceptions in order for us to be able to harness it, to create a little bit of a greater strength. So here's another, so I'm just going to go through with you the different phases of stress, just so we have an understanding of those, and then how we can deal with the different phases and to support our overall well-being. So Hans Selye here, he has his different stages of stress. We relate to acute stress, which is in the moment, in an immediate, right before a presentation, right before competing, when we see something, when we're maybe, we're running out into traffic and we think we almost are going to get hit by a car or something. This is very acute in the moment. But then there's the adaptation phase, and then the exhaustion phase. And so I'm just going to go through each of those in a little bit in terms of what is our physiological response to those, and how can we mentally change our thoughts to then in the long run help change maybe our feelings and our physiological reaction. So acute stress is, I like this picture here because this bear is chasing this athlete, and this athlete is obviously in an acute state of stress, either because one, he's trying to maybe win a race because he looks like an athlete, or because he just wants to beat this bear, and he will on a bike going downhill. There's no doubt about it. He will beat the bear. But in that moment, you know, obviously you get all kinds of different hormonal things that are happening. So you release a lot of cortisol. Now, a lot of people think of cortisol as bad, but cortisol is very important. We need cortisol in our bodies. We just don't want too much. So when we get cortisol, what happens, or a higher level, is our body helps to release some of these glycogen stores in our cells, which is basically sugar and food. And so it allows our body to use that so that we can run or do something physical in the moment. But our brain also needs it. Like our brain requires sugar, you know, and needs that as well. It will suppress our immune function in those acute states. So if you've ever heard people even who maybe, for example, go and even physical stress can do the same thing. If somebody goes to run a marathon, their immune system is broken down for about a couple of weeks afterwards. But in the moment of the acute stress, our digestion will be different. So I don't know if you've ever had, like right before an interview, for example, or some kind of big event, you know, you might be running to the bathroom more often because our body's like, let's just get rid of things or put things on hold. It's one or the other. Then we secrete a lot of noradrenaline and norepinephrine, so our heart beats faster. All of these things you guys know, right? Of the acute reaction that we get, and it also releases dopamine, which sometimes can be good for us, but again, too much of anything can be kind of negative, right? All right, so acute stress here and there is okay, and it can be good to help us run away from the bear, but it's not good for a long time if it's that acute. So the chronic stress relates back to, again, sometimes this culture of busyness or this hustle culture that a lot of us feel that we are experiencing. And a lot of times people will talk about busyness as almost as a badge of honor because, you know, so busy, but I'm also doing a lot of things and I'm accomplishing a lot of things, or I've got a lot going on in my life. And kind of it's a sense of pride because of doing and accomplishing things. But really trying to decrease that amount of busyness will actually help us achieve more. It's more about what are we achieving versus, and in the big picture of things, then what is it that we are doing day to day, in and out. Because if we are constantly switching from one task to another task to another task and never having a moment to breathe, it can result in all kinds of things. So disrupted sleep and rest cycle, we're going to have physical and mental health issues, which we're going to go into, and obviously reduced productivity as well, because you really, any types of busyness, and which can be chronic stress, too much, right? Too high of a workload can really impact us. But again, the more that we can create space between things and look at even mindfulness practices and stepping back to see the picture, the more productive in the end that we can be. So we'll talk more about those tips here in just a minute. And what does exhaustion lead to? It leads to burnout. So we already talked about burnout. Burnout is that chronic distress, it's exhaustion, lack of motivation and drive, and it can impact our productivity and really impact our physical, mental, and our cognitive health, in the long run too. And so it's really important that we focus in on and preventing burnout, and that we address the signs and symptoms before they become and turn into burnout. And I think it was like 75% of you said yes, you've experienced it, or you think you may have experienced it and you're not quite sure. So it's a big issue, right? And we need to address that. So this chronic stress and everything is not doing us any favor. And, at the end of the day, what's more important to us looking back in our lives is, achieving everything that we need to achieve in these days, or, having enough time with our families, or feeling at peace with things, and, preventing things like this, right? So let's talk about, so I've uploaded to the chat function, and you will have already had, and you will be able to find the link to the resilience worksheet. So I want you to make sure that you have that open now, and we are going to work through some of the signs and symptoms. And so I'm going to want you, as I'm going through and listing some of the signs and symptoms for the various issues, that you make a note of those. That's personal to yourself. You don't need to share that with anybody. You just have that on your hand, but it's good to take note of any personal signs and symptoms that you're facing right now, so that we can then to create some strategies to address those, and prevent them from happening, prevent bigger things from happening, like more burnout, and obviously loss of productivity, motivation, and just all over decreased quality of life. Okay, so I hope you have your worksheets ready. So we're going to go through the symptoms for all of these things. So the first column that you have, or the first row that you have, is around compassion fatigue, which again can be really common in your role. And you'll notice a lot of these signs and symptoms. So even if you're not a direct caregiver or you're not supporting others, you can still see some of these signs and symptoms for sure in your role, just by being a factor of just trying to support people as a parent, as a colleague, as a wife, husband, spouse, and or even just supporting your boss and that kind of thing, right? So here's some of the signs and symptoms. So feelings of failure, guilt, self-doubt, sadness, powerlessness. So again, write these down if you're feeling any of these. Loss of sleep, reduced sense of efficacy on the job, if you're having any difficulty concentrating, if you're feeling overwhelmed by your obligations, and again, that can just be from workload, right? But write it down anyways. We just want to see what kinds of signs and symptoms you're having so we can look at how we can resolve those. Having any types of apathy and emotional numbness, having any kind of secretive addictions or self-medicating in a variety of ways, feeling isolated, withdrawal. So as you notice, these are some of the warning signs that we were talking about earlier, for violence as well. But again, they're just signs and symptoms that something probably needs to be done to help support yourself and your own overall well-being. If you're feeling exhausted, if you're having any intrusive thoughts, and or any bottled up emotions, and you're unable to kind of release those. So I'll give you another minute here just to write down any of those signs and symptoms that you are feeling. And we all experience some of these at different points in time, but it's just really important that that we take note of them, and especially when there's a big change in things. Okay. All right. So we're going to move down now to our physical signs and symptoms, and there is a laundry list. If you might need to pull out your glasses to read this one, because our bodies and our minds are very much connected, and sometimes it's they're so interconnected. It's important to notice. And a lot of times signs and symptoms, physical symptoms that we're having that we go see our physician, actually they stem from stress. So it's important again to notice if we're having any of these things. So I'm gonna have to get up close to look at these, but I think I do well. I know them pretty well anyways. But so anyways, fatigue, obviously, like the physical fatigue versus the mental fatigue are kind of different things. If you're feeling even things like nauseousness, right? If you're feeling like you're always just breathing very shallow and not taking kind of deep breaths. If you're, feeling any types of confusion, if your heart seems to be racing a lot, or you're getting palpitations all the time, and it's not related just to acute stress, but it seems to be happening more and more often throughout the whole workday because you've just got so much on the go. If you've increased thirst just because of the shallow breathing, and the increased heart rate and all these things will lend to that. You might have senses of like physical weakness. Some of the bodily functions might be functioning differently. So, increased use of the bathroom, those kinds of things, a lot of muscular tension because you're unable to fully relax, all of these different things. So just take a moment to write some of these things down, and of these physical signs and symptoms, and then we'll go on to thinkings and feelings. And it's a lot of sitting. So feel free, you guys, to stand, move around, stretch. During my breaks, I did 10 squats to help get my heart rate going again. All right, so let's move on to thinkings and feelings. So I've got less here, but they're big issues. So memory and cognition. So if you're noticing, I mean, with age, our memory and cognition, I think it's after 30 that brain cells start dying pretty quickly. But fortunately, we learn how to more efficiently use our brain. But anyways, if we're seeing decline in our memory and our cognition, if we're seeming to having more mood swings, more fatigue, any kind of depression, irritability, more anxiety, all of these things, if these are more present than before and are kind of an issue, please make a note of these thinkings and feelings as well. Okay. All right, guys. Okay, let's move on to behavior. So I'm just going to go through some of signs and symptoms of things, behavior that maybe other people might see. So this you might want to even think about for yourself, and or if you see other people experiencing some of these signs that there's something kind of going on. So whenever there's types of compulsive behavior, so maybe little shopping addictions, right? You get the little rush, but then it kind of quickly diminishes, or maybe just eating too much or little relates to sometimes compulsive behavior for eating too much or binge eating or drinking too much, those kinds of things. Withdrawing and isolating, procrastinating on things. And like if you're a natural procrastinator and that's just what you kind of do, then you might not want to write it down. But if you're starting to do that as a result of probably stress, then write that down. Or if you've been undergoing stress for a long time, then maybe that still might be valid. Any kinds of fidgeting and nail biting, the alcohol I already mentioned. So any kinds of issues like this, please make a note of those as well. Okay. All right. So we're moving on now. And I just want to bring your mind to the environmental impacts of our stress. So throughout the session, I'm going to be talking about how we have this power to be able to choose our thoughts, and we have the ability to reframe things, and how we deal with stress relates to our perception of it and all of these things. But we have to obviously, and I know you're probably already going to be thinking about this, that the environment in which we are live is really going to impact our stress. So obviously our work stresses us. The fact that we don't have enough money and we're expected to do more things with less, and all of these different things with our workload is going to really impact us. And it has a huge impact. In fact, a lot of people will say I worked with the government of Alberta, and I was involved in the development of a wellness strategy. A wellness strategy. It was called the Strategic Approach to Wellness. It was back in 2013, and and in that strategic document, there's an outline of well-being and what impacts our well-being. And a lot of people, like early days in health promotion, say even like longer than this, like 10, 15, 20 years ago, people often always really try to focus in on saying, well, you know what, individuals just need to make healthier choices. We just need to do this and do that. And it's like in their hands, but maybe we just need to empower them or tell them how to do that, or how to change their behavior. But the fact of the matter is that our well-being is extremely impacted by the environment in which we live, and has a huge impact on that. And in fact, it's about 85% of our health outcomes are impacted by the environment in which we live. So it has to do with things like the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the quality of life, and the people that we work with, our work environment, and all of these things. And only about 15% is actually genetic, and a very small percentage is really related to, again, the choices that we make. But the fact is it's very oftentimes very difficult for us to make the healthy choices, because the healthy choices aren't the easy choices. And in supporting our well-being, and in terms of managing our stress as well, because we don't feel like we have many choices, right? So there's this balance. So just keep that in mind. And that's why I talk a lot about how can we make our workplace culture one where we can thrive? And how can we influence the culture and the environment? Because that will help us then to be well, so that we can do well. So it's so important to just consider all of these things. But right now we're focusing in on what you can control in the moment, in conjunction with what you can change maybe in the workplace, to create the culture, make the culture a little bit more supportive and a healthy environment for you to live in. But all these other things are impacting us. So pace of life and technology, right? There's often lack of an access to healthy foods, especially at work, when we have less time. Some people found they have more time with COVID-19 because they're at home and they're cooking more, and other people, they find they have less time because they're working and now they have their kids there and they're trying to work and with their kids, and it's really difficult. And so it varies, right? But other things that impact us too is just even like our winters, shorter days, lack of sunlight, not having enough time to get outside and go for walks and take those breaks. Our expectations are changing, husbands and wives and are working alike, and yet we still have to do all the things at home versus having one person dedicated to that. Our sitting jobs are not good for our physical well-being, and our workload obviously is kind of one of those important things. So I am going to show you a quick little video that talks about how powerful our perceptions are. So as I said, we're going to be focusing in on really what we can change with our perceptions, with our choices that we make, and how we perceive things. So I'm going to show, there's a TED Talk here. I'll share the link with you so that you can watch the whole thing, but I'm only going to show about the first 4 minutes of it because it really gets down to the entire gist of it, and gets right down to the point so that we have more time for action planning later on. So let's go into this little TED Talk, which is pretty good, and will challenge probably a lot of the way we think about stress.
I have a confession to make. But first, I want you to make a little confession to me. In the past year, I want you to just raise your hand if you've experienced relatively little stress. Anyone? How about a moderate amount of stress? Who's experienced a lot of stress? Yeah, me too. But that is not my confession. My confession is this: I'm a health psychologist, and my mission is to help people be happier and healthier. But I fear that something I've been teaching for the last 10 years is doing more harm than good, and it has to do with stress. For years, I've been telling people stress makes you sick. It increases the risk of everything from the common cold to cardiovascular disease. Basically, I've turned stress into the enemy. But I've changed my mind about stress, and today, I want to change yours. Let me start with the study that made me rethink my whole approach to stress. This study tracked 30,000 adults in the United States for 8 years, and they started by asking people, how much stress have you experienced in the last year? They also asked, do you believe that stress is harmful for your health? And then they used public death records to find out who died. Okay, some bad news first. People who experienced a lot of stress in the previous year had a 43% increased risk of dying. But that was only true for the people who also believed that stress is harmful for your health. People who experienced a lot of stress but did not view stress as harmful were no more likely to die. In fact, they had the lowest risk of dying of anyone in the study, including people who had relatively little stress. Now, the researchers estimated that over the 8 years they were tracking deaths, 182,000 Americans died prematurely, not from stress, but from the belief that stress is bad for you. That is over 20,000 deaths a year. Now, if that estimate is correct, That would make believing stress is bad for you the 15th largest cause of death in the United States last year, killing more people than skin cancer, HIV, AIDS, and homicide. You can see why this study freaked me out. Here I've been spending so much energy telling people stress is bad for your health.
All right. All right. So that's an interesting perspective that she brings to the table. And the one other piece that I want to share with you about what she was saying about stress and why the people who had the perception that stress wasn't bad didn't die prematurely was because the perception of their stress actually changed their physiological response. So people who perceived stress as negative had all those same physical symptoms, signs and symptoms that we were talking about before, with the heart palpitations or increased heart rate, the sweating, the increased stress and thirst, and all of these different things that happened. But the very big difference and what impacts your heart health, which contributes to death, as she was talking about, was a constriction of your blood vessels. So when your blood vessels constrict, and you have also any type of plaque or atherosclerosis, then that's going to increase your chances of having heart events and premature death. But the difference was with the people who perceived it as something that was positive and perceived it as something that helped them to excel or to move forward or help them to grow stronger, or something that exhilarated them to get through things and make a difference or make a change, was that their blood vessels didn't constrict. So they had all the other similar symptoms, except their attitudes and their physiological response actually changed. So the blood vessels did not constrict, which means that it didn't have the adverse effect. So if you had any narrowing or any plaque in your arteries or atherosclerosis, the narrowing of your blood vessels can have dire consequences, right? So that's pretty amazing what she shared there. So perception of stress can make all the difference in the world. So I have another video here. I'm not going to share it with you right now, but I'm going to share it with you afterwards and send you the link. And this is a whiteboard video by Dr. Mike Evans. So he's a preventative health physician out of he's on Ontario, and he's almost kind of become a little bit of he is a celebrity for the work that he's done. And he has a video called what is the single most important thing to beat stress? And so he shares all kinds of tips and tidbits, which have some similarities to some of the things that I'm going to share here with you today. And his number one tip in terms of how we can beat stress all relates to our perception and how we can reframe our minds and view stress in a totally different way and use it as a catalyst for greater strength and resilience and wisdom that we were learning about earlier. So reframing our thoughts. So how do we do this? So here's the theme, right? Our perception, it can change our physiological response to stress. And basically, and we also know again from what Dr. Mike Evans says, is that the single best thing that we can do to beat our stress is to reframe our thoughts and change our thinking style. And he says in his video as well, and I think it's Abraham Lincoln that says, the most powerful gift that we have as human beings is the power to choose one thought over another thought. Which is powerful, right? And sometimes we get caught into thinking traps and distortions. And it's important to remember that we have the opportunity to choose our reaction. We have a lot of power. We have this, we need to increase our own sense of control over our reaction to things, and changing our thought patterns can be extremely powerful. So as Hans Selye says, he's a big expert on stress. He says it's not stress that kills us, it's our reaction to it, which is what that lady was saying in the How to Make Stress Your Friend TED Talk, that again, it's our perception and it's our reaction to it. So how we feel about stress is not going to be something that we can necessarily change automatically. But we can start to change our thought patterns in order to change our perceptions, which can then change how we feel about stress. So let's talk about how we do this. What are some factors that can help us to manage stress? So there's two major factors. The most important one is our internal dialogue and thoughts. And it's the harder one to change for sure, but it's going to be the most powerful one for us in the long run. And then the second one is the external personal resources, and those are the tools and skills that we can learn. So I'm going to go through both of those with you so that we can continue to work on that worksheet and build a little bit of a strategies and support for yourself, so that we can address those signs and symptoms that you were experiencing and help us to overcome those issues. And I'm going to go through lots of different tools and skills. And on the back side of the sheet, if you had printed it, or on the second side, there's a section for your toolbox. So any kinds of tips and tools that I'm sharing as well, definitely put those in there, right? In your toolbox so that you can reference back to them later on. Okay, so for your internal dialogue and thoughts. So oftentimes our mind will play tricks on us, right? And can distort our view just based on habits, how our parents view things, how our colleagues view things. And sometimes we get into these traps, which are basically thinking distortions. And these thinking distortions are kind of the basis of what cognitive behavioral therapy is all about. And, when we basically, they help when you get support, you will start to learn how to identify these thinking traps or these thinking distortions in order to then reframe your thoughts. And they can have a really powerful impact on our ability to manage stress and to, again, be healthier and more productive. So here's a few examples. Oh, and just to give you a quick history about it. So these common thinking distortions, they were first came up in the 1960s by psychologist Aaron T. Beck. And since then, a lot of therapists have been using them to help people correct these negative thinkings. And it's been one of the most kind of successful approaches to help people to manage stress and go through things. So here are some examples here. So the all or none black and white thinking is it's a pretty common one. So here's an example. I had a piece of cake, my whole diet is ruined, I might as well just eat the whole cake. Right? So there's not a lot of room for just moderation or a little treat here and there, right? And that can work in any kind of situation. Overgeneralizing and using the words never and always, I'm bad for that personally. Or saying other things like, I'm so unlucky, birds always poop in my car. Well, they probably don't always. Actually, funny story about that. I was getting a lot of bird poop on my car recently, was because it was parked underneath under a light, and that's where the birds perch. So sometimes you just have to look at the external situation and fix the root of that. So maybe you have mental filters and you think about the negative more than the positive. That's where the practice of gratefulness can come in and be really helpful to really think about having more positive thoughts in general and helping you be a little bit more positive. Just jumping to inclusions when maybe there's no facts. So just assuming somebody doesn't like you when there's no real facts to back that up. And then some of the other ones here are, just exaggerating negatives again, and minimizing the positives, including, concluding when you're using any types of emotional reasoning that the result of your emotions is a result of is fact, even though your feelings might not match the situation. Using should statements, so beating yourself up or criticizing others when things don't turn out the way they should have been. But just basically, sometimes putting blame on people or situations versus kind of thinking about the root issue or what could have changed. Labeling. So, if you made a mistake, just saying that you're a screw up. So that's labeling, calling yourself a screw up because you made a mistake, even though it was just one little mistake. It doesn't mean you are a screw up in general, right? and then, other things, just really personalizing things or putting blame on other people. So these are just some really common thinking distortions that we all have, and so it can be really helpful. You'll have the slides afterwards to review these again, to understand, what issues am I facing right now, and what distortions do I have right now, and how can I start to reframe those. Sometimes a good way to be, if you saw one of these right now that you kind of relate to, is sometimes people will wear like a certain wristband or an elastic rubber band on their wrist, and whenever they're thinking one of these things or have negative self-talk even, just to snap it as like a physical connection, to reminder of that you've made that negative thought, and then there's that reminder for you again to reframe it. And then you'll notice more and more with the snapping of the band, how you're having those thoughts, and it's just an easy way to put that physical connection to it to help you kind of overcome those things. Okay, so let's talk about how we reframe our thought. So we know there's a lot of cognitive thinking distortions we have, and we know that positively perceiving stress can really help us in terms of our health outcomes, and our perception can be everything. But how do we do that, right? So here's a few questions just to kind of ask yourself. So think about, well, what is the source of my stress? Like, is it the workload? Is it just the way I'm perceiving it? Is there something that I can manage in it, right? Is it because of a thinking distortion? Maybe, our mind's playing tricks on us. And thinking about the bigger picture. Is this something that is really going to matter in 10 days or in 10 months or in 10 years? Sometimes that can be really helpful to look at the big picture. Another thing is some things will just bother you or be irritating, and just think about, are you choosing to let this bother you? Because again, we do have that power to choose our reaction. We can't always control other people, unfortunately, and we can't always control our situation, but we can control how we react to it. And so trying to reframe our thoughts and try to choose a different thought and reaction, can be really helpful. The other one too is think about the environment. Does something really need to change? Like if you have this BGBS, which is barely getting by syndrome, the chances are there is something that needs to change more than just your perception, right? That you need to change something, that you need to talk to your boss about the workload and say, we need to prioritize this and put things on the shelf as a not to do list or for later, because I can't do it all well. I can do these things well, but not these things. It's having an impact on my health. And if we want to prevent burnout and me going off on leave, those types of things, and having those conversations. Or there's all kinds of different things that we can do, or maybe changing the shift of your schedule, or sharing responsibility, or getting help and getting support if you need support. Sometimes it's hard to ask for support, but just asking and getting that support that we need, whether it be in our personal lives, or whether it's at work. So those are kinds of some things to think about for reframing our thoughts. But other things, so I want you to maybe put this in your toolbox. Put down a name, 1 or 2 names in your toolbox of people that you can call. One of the biggest determinant of us being able to weather the storm or get through really tough things is whether or not we have colleagues and friends who we can rely on that can support us. It is really, really, really important to have those people. So make sure that we put a couple people on our toolbox, because that support system is so important. Again, using some community resources can also be really important, and help support us to a greater meaning and purpose in life, or things that are related to outside of just our work and our family. So maybe there's a common interest group, or there's something you've been wanting to try for a while. I know things look a little bit different with COVID, but there's still a lot of things out there. So that might be something you might even want to put down on your worksheet as a goal, is to find some kind of common interest out group for yourself. We're going to go through some more specific short and long-term goals in a bit, but this might be something you want to put down there, potentially, if that's what you're looking for. Again, using online resources. So there are, like I said, the Wellness Together Canada portal does a free assessment and connects you to free counseling and resources that is really good to use as a proactive, preventative, and or management um, uh, system to support you. And the other thing too is within your support system is sharing the experience of others. So whether that be with people at work or others, just venting and sharing experiences can be really quite therapeutic, right? And so doing that can also be really helpful. All right. So now I want to talk a little bit about how we can lower some unhealthy cortisol levels. So interesting facts. Meditation and the simple practice of saying can reduce your cortisol level by 20%. Not all of us want to meditate. I'm going to talk about mindfulness later because that's meditation can take some work, especially if you have a lot of anxiety. Music can though decrease your cortisol by about 60%. Obviously having naps or getting enough sleep is so important to help reduce that. I'm going to show you something just in a second here about how important sleep is. The polyphenols and flavonoids in black tea can actually really help and decrease your cortisol levels as well, up to 47%. So just having a tea. So these are maybe things you want to put in your toolbox, like a good song, maybe black tea, things like massage, obviously. And sometimes we don't always have the time or ability to get out there. And with COVID, it's all different too. So maybe swapping, taking turns with your spouse or whatever it is, or even with your kids. Kids can give good massages. Taking turns. Doing something spiritual doesn't mean religious, but it could be religious depending on what works for you. Just connecting to that higher meaning and purpose within your life. Chewing a piece of gum can actually decrease your cortisol by something around 16%. So just popping in a piece of gum can just help you just that have that difference in the flavor. And then obviously hanging out with a funny friend or a colleague, they don't always necessarily even need to be funny, but that can be helpful. And that can be really important. Another thing here too is if, like, I know what works for me really well is if I am feeling kind of stressed in the moment and I need to connect to the bigger picture, I'll look at a picture of my kids because they're so freaking cute. So they're 2 and 4. So I'll look at their little pictures on my phone for a minute, and you get that little oxytocin shot, right? And you're good to go and to plug on and to carry on. All right, so back to the sleep. So as I was saying before, our cortisol is important. We need cortisol a certain level to keep us motivated and energized. And so you can see how we have a cycle of where we'll have cortisol in the daytime and more melatonin at night. The important thing I want you to take out of this picture here is that obviously when we're sleeping, our cells are regenerating and a lot of repair is happening at the cellular level, but the psychological repair is only happening at the end of our sleep cycle. So it's really important that we get enough sleep, because if we're cutting our sleep short, we might be getting the physical repair in, but we might not be getting the psychological repair in. And that how we sort through problems and issues through the workday. We also come up with all kinds of solutions for things in our sleep. Like our thoughts are really getting organized, and we are storing memories, and all kinds of really important things are happening when we're sleeping. And if we're not getting that last couple of hours of sleep, that psychological repair isn't going to happen. And so even though maybe we're physically okay, we're probably not going to be okay mentally. So it's really important that we focus in on supporting our getting enough sleep. And there's a lot of studies that say that if we're not getting enough sleep, oftentimes we think we're kind of doing okay, but when they have people conduct tasks or do quizzes, people's stress or people's cognitive functioning is actually quite a bit deterred with lack of sleep. So focus and prioritize your sleep. So sleep, put that in your toolbox too. Getting enough sleep. So there's all kinds of other things, right? Nutrition, the human humor and connection to other people, getting exposed to nature, getting exercise, having exposure to bright light, especially in the winter time, right? As our days are shorter, and our whole thought processes all connect well-being for us and support us to be able to manage stress. But as I was saying before, music can be really powerful. So it's important. That could be a really great thing to put in your toolbox, a song. Nature is also can be really important. I'll share this video with you afterwards. I'm not going to share it right now, but it's quite funny. It's about a prescription to get outside and embrace nature, even in wintertime, people. um, Even when it's cold outside, getting fresh air is so important for us. And so I'm just going to go through a few more tips here. And I just want to say, so this is again something we can put in our toolbox is just getting outside for a walk, going for a walk, doing whatever it is, doing some push-ups or squats. You might not want to do that. I do those kinds of things, but not everybody does. So there's a huge link between physical activity and our mental functioning. And so as you can see here, this is an MRI of two brains. One is sitting quietly after 20 minutes, and then after 20 minutes of walking, and look how the brain lights up like a Christmas tree. Physical activity can work wonders. So little things like walking meetings or parking your car far away or just doing things that you really enjoy. Don't go to the gym if you don't like going to the gym. If you don't like gym culture, you can still get active and do things that you enjoy, like join some kind of sports group, or maybe it is some kind of group exercise, or maybe it's going for a walk, or walking your dog, or going for a bike ride with your family. Whatever it is, do things that you enjoy. Don't try to do something you don't enjoy, because you probably won't keep doing it if you don't like it. All right. Nutrition again is so important. So here's just an example of the food guide again. So when you're thinking about your goals, I'm going to show you short-term and long-term goals that you can use and put into your guideline or into your worksheet. But just important to remember that this is the food guide. I know you've probably all seen it before, but it's important that we focus in on trying to get more veggies and fruits, because that impacts our mental ability to deal with stress. When we have lots of sugar, we get these crashes and it changes our mood, and it really becomes an addictive pattern. And so trying to reduce sugar but eating more veggies and fruits and protein foods and everything can really help support us. It's 78% of Canadians aren't eating enough veggies and fruit. That's astonishing, right? So just that could be one of your goals, is to add an additional serving of veggies and fruit per day for a week, right? Simple, but can really help get you the minerals and the vitamins that you need for proper brain functioning in order to deal with stress. All right, so I'm getting near the end, where I'm just going to share again the short and long term that you can steal and put into your and pick goals that are relevant for you into your worksheet. So mindfulness is so important for dealing with stress and can help us to perceive it in that positive way that we want to perceive it in. So in order to be mindful, though, in order to perceive things in a better way, sometimes we just need space. So putting space between things. So try scheduling 45, 50-minute meetings instead of hour meetings, because you need that time to breathe afterwards and to process what happened and what you're going to do moving forwards. Spending just a few minutes a day doing nothing. You could download an app. There's some good apps. Breathe, Headspace, and Calm are 3 good apps that can help you get into a mindfulness practice, or to help you just set more intentions. A lot of times mindfulness is just trying to be in the moment, right? That's what it is. You don't necessarily need to meditate or have a practice. So instead of worrying always about the future or the past, just trying again to be in the moment as much as possible. One good tip is just try this 5-5-5 or a body scan practice. So it's something anybody can do anywhere. So right before you get to work, for example, stop for 5 minutes. Doesn't even have to be 5 minutes, it could be 3, but think about your 5 senses and notice 5 things that you're noticing within that sense. So 5 things that you're seeing, 5 things that you're hearing, 5 things that you're feeling, 5 things that you're smelling. And the taste one is a bit weird if you're not eating, but go through your senses and just go through that, just to stop in the moment and to be aware of how you are in that moment, and try to be more present. Because when we are a bit more present, again, we can see the bigger picture, and we're probably going to be a little bit more deliberate and more strategic in getting the work done that we have to do as it relates to work, but also obviously just have a better quality of life in general, because we're a little bit less stressed. So gratefulness. So being grateful is so powerful. It can increase our positivity ratio. Deborah Connors talks about this a lot. The more positive thoughts we have, the happier we'll be, the better we'll be able to perceive our stress, the more productive we'll be. So try just every day writing down 3 things that you're grateful for. Simple, but very powerful. All right. So most of us have probably heard of SMART goals. I'm not going to go through them, but basically, I want you to go to your worksheet and I want you to write down, at least one or two goals of things that you want to work on in the next 2 weeks, and make sure that they're as specific as possible and they're totally reasonable and achievable for you, so that so that they can become sustainable. And if they don't work out, do not sweat it. Just revisit it at the end of 2 weeks and start and do a new goal, because it's a process of learning, not an execution problem, remember, right? As Amy Edmondson said. So follow through with how doing things that work for you. So write down some things now. Take a couple of minutes and just write down some short-term and some long-term goals. And here are just some ideas, but I also talked about a lot of other ideas. So I just want you to insert those into your plan, and then we'll get near the end of this session. Oh, and if you're not familiar with the Pomodoro technique, it's a technique to help improve productivity and a feeling of accomplishment with the work that you're doing. So basically what it is it means that you set a timer of 25 minutes for specific tasks in your day. So say you have a whole bunch of tasks that you need to achieve and you don't think you're going to get through them all. So basically what you do is you make a list of like 4 things that you want to achieve. You set a timer for 25 minutes for one task. At the end of the 25 minutes, you stop that task and you check off the box. And then you take a 2 to 3 minute break and then you move on to the next task and work on it for 25 minutes. Whether you're done it or not, you check it off and you move on to the next one. And so you do that for about 4 times, and then you take a longer break, like a 15-minute break, maybe 20-minute break, to kind of reset. But it really helps to get you to focus, and it's really helpful for productivity, because sometimes it can be difficult to kind of get the motivation or to know where to start, and that can be helpful for that. Okay, while you're writing those things down, I am going to pull up the evaluation form that I'm going to put in the link, and I have some more closing comments as well, of course, and the summary for you. All right, so it looks like you guys maybe have written down one thing or two. Okay, so again, this is a learning, as you go through. Learning how to manage stress and how to reframe your thoughts takes practice and it takes time. But I'm going to leave you with a few kind of key top tips. So remember that, control what you control, right? So reframing your thoughts and perceiving things as something that will help you move forward and help you accomplish things and help you to grow stronger is something that will really enable you to deal with stress in a better way to support your overall health and well-being. But there's also lots of things that can help support you as well. So the sleep is so important. So exercising, trying to get as much sleep as possible will help a lot. Exercising will help a lot, not just from exercise will help you sleep, and it will also help your mental functioning, and it's also just a great stress reliever, and it increases mood. There's so many benefits to it. Getting outside in nature as much as possible is also something that can be really helpful and really supportive for you. Trying to avoid sugary comfort foods is obviously helpful as well, and trying to eat enough vitamins and minerals and in vegetables and fruits will really help you get the micronutrients that you need to support mental functioning and to your ability to manage stress and to be well and to be physically well. Filtering your stress, reframe your thoughts. That's the most important thing that we can do, right? So I want you to watch, if you get the chance, to that TED Talk, or it's not a TED Talk, but the whiteboard video by Dr. Mike Evans. It's really powerful. And again, use the items in your toolbox as much as possible. Practice relaxation techniques, and I hope that you continue to use that worksheet. I hope you've set at least one goal that you're going to take forwards and move with you and forward to help support your own individual health and well-being, and help you to manage stress. And I want you to hopefully revisit it and be really intentional and purposeful about managing your well-being, because just plowing through will eventually erode your ability to be productive, and it'll erode your overall well-being. And of course, you want to be healthy and you want to have a good quality of life, but you also want to be productive and achieve great things. And so it's important that we focus on this and remember that it's so important to invest in health and well-being, because it supports the performance of our individual and our team and our organization and our community and our country. Right, when every workplace starts investing in this, it has a huge ripple effect. And in the workplace, in order to really effectively support health and performance, we need to integrate it into existing practices as much as possible, so that it's sustainable. And in terms of the nonviolent crisis intervention, it requires some empathy, some respect, space, and calm. And the most important thing there is the empathy and the listening piece. And finally, the biggest thing I want you to take out away from today is that in order to do well, we do first need to be well. So if you want more support, there's lots of other additional resources that you can find on alignalberta.ca, wellnessworkscanada.ca, Guarding Minds at Work, and Helping Workplaces, Helping Professionals.ca. And so definitely check those out. Again, I want to thank Align Association of Community Services, Wellness Works Canada, and the Government of Alberta for sponsoring these sessions today, and making these available for you. If you at any point have any other questions or want to chat with me further, that is my contact information, and I will send up a follow-up email, so you will have it. And finally, if you have a moment, please complete the evaluation. It should only take 1 to 2 minutes, and the link is in the chat function there for you right now as well. So I just want to thank you again for spending the day with me. It's a long time to sit online for some education. It's always nicer in person, but this is still a great way to connect, to network, and to learn some great ways to support healthy, high-performing work cultures. So thank you, everyone. I will stay on for a few minutes, and if you have any questions, and otherwise, I hope you can complete that quick survey, and I will chat with you and hopefully run into you with some way, shape, or form in the future. So thank you, everybody.